The package slipped from the delivery driver's trembling hands and hit the polished marble floor with a sharp crack that echoed through the towering glass lobby. Every conversation stopped. More than 50 employees turned at once. Standing in the center of the room was Ethan Brooks, the powerful CEO of Brooks Global Technologies, a man whose name appeared on magazine covers almost every month. His perfectly tailored suit looked untouched by the busy morning around him, but his face twisted with anger. "You had one job," Ethan said loudly, his voice cutting through the silence. "Deliver a package without making a mess." The young delivery driver bent down immediately, apologizing as he carefully picked up the scattered papers. I'm really sorry, sir." His voice was calm, almost gentle. He couldn't have been older than 24. His blue delivery uniform had faded from hundreds of washes. The soles of his shoes had been repaired so many times that the original rubber was almost impossible to recognize. A thin backpack rested on his shoulders, and a small stitched patch covered a tear near one pocket. Several employees exchanged uncomfortable glances. One woman quietly stepped forward, wanting to help collect the papers. Ethan stopped her with a wave of his hand. "No," he said. "If he made the mistake, he can clean it himself." A few nervous laughs spread through the lobby. The young driver lowered his head but never argued. He simply gathered every page with careful hands. Nobody noticed that one photograph had slipped beneath a nearby chair. Nobody except the delivery driver. As he reached for it, he froze for just a second. The picture showed a little girl, perhaps 7 years old, smiling beside Ethan during what looked like a birthday party. The driver stared at her face longer than anyone normally would. Something in his expression changed. Not fear. Not embarrassment, recognition. Then he quietly slid the picture back onto the pile without saying a word. Ethan snatched the papers from him. "Maybe delivery work is too difficult for you." The words landed harder than anyone expected. The driver simply nodded. "I understand, sir." No anger, no excuses, no pride, just quiet dignity. As he turned toward the exit, the security guard held the glass door open with an apologetic smile. "Have a good day," the guard whispered. The young man smiled back. "You too." Outside, cold wind swept across the city streets. He climbed onto his aging delivery scooter after checking a long list of remaining addresses. His phone buzzed. "Rent due tomorrow." Another message followed. "Grandpa's medication is almost gone." He closed the notifications without replying. There wasn't enough money to solve either problem today. He started the scooter. The engine coughed twice before finally coming to life. Rush hour traffic swallowed him almost immediately. Most people never noticed delivery drivers. They arrived. They handed over a package. Then they disappeared. Invisible, replaceable, forgettable. But this young man carried something far more valuable than boxes. Inside his backpack rested a worn notebook filled with handwritten medical notes. Every spare minute between deliveries he studied. Late at night, after finishing work, he borrowed old textbooks from the public library. Years earlier, he had dreamed of becoming a doctor. Life had chosen a different road. When his parents died in a highway accident, college disappeared overnight. Bills arrived instead. His grandfather became his only family. Medicine became expensive. Food became limited. Dreams became something to postpone, so he worked, morning until night. Rain, snow, summer heat, every delivery helped keep one more light on inside their tiny apartment. Yet somehow, he never stopped learning. Every evening before sleeping, he opened the same notebook. Human anatomy, emergency medicine, first aid, trauma care, everything he could teach himself. His grandfather often laughed softly. "You still study like someone who's already wearing a white coat." The young man always smiled. "Maybe one day," his grandfather would place a weathered hand on his shoulder. "Don't stop believing before life finishes writing your story." Those words stayed with him every single day. That afternoon, after completing another delivery downtown, his route unexpectedly sent him back to Brooks Global Technologies. He parked across the street while checking the next package. Same building, same CEO, same address. He took a slow breath before crossing the busy intersection. Inside the lobby, employees hurried in every direction. Nobody even looked at him this time. He quietly waited near the reception desk while the receptionist called upstairs. Then something unexpected happened. A scream shattered the peaceful rhythm of the building. It came from somewhere above, not one scream, several. People suddenly began running toward the elevators. Someone yelled, "Call an ambulance!" Another voice shouted, "It's the CEO's daughter!" The delivery driver looked up instinctively. For a single heartbeat, everything around him seemed to stop. Then, without thinking about who had mocked him only hours before, he dropped his delivery bag and ran toward the chaos. The elevator doors had barely begun to close when the young delivery driver slipped through them. Inside, frightened employees pressed themselves against the walls. Nobody spoke. Only the sound of panicked breathing filled the small space. The driver looked at a woman whose hands were shaking uncontrollably. "What happened?" she struggled to answer. "Mr. Brooks' daughter, she just collapsed during her school visit." The driver's heartbeat quickened. "Is she breathing?" I don't know." The elevator climbed painfully slowly. Every passing floor felt like an hour. When the doors finally opened, chaos rushed in all at once. People crowded the executive floor. Phones rang non-stop. Someone was crying. Another employee was desperately trying to clear space around a small figure lying on the polished wooden floor. It was the little girl from the photograph. She looked even younger in person. Her tiny backpack lay beside her. One pink sneaker had slipped off. Her face had turned frighteningly pale. Ethan Brooks knelt beside her, completely different from the confident CEO everyone feared. His expensive suit was wrinkled. His hands trembled as he gently held his daughter's shoulders. "Emma, sweetheart, wake up." There was no answer. A woman wearing a business suit was trying to help. "I watched a first aid video once," she whispered nervously. Another man suggested giving the child water. Someone else shouted for an ambulance again. Everyone wanted to help. Nobody knew what to do. The delivery driver pushed carefully through the crowd. "Please, give her some room." Several people looked at him with confusion. One executive frowned. "This isn't your business." Before anyone could stop him, Ethan looked up. Their eyes met. Recognition flashed across Ethan's face. "You," he said sharply. The delivery driver remained calm. "May I see her?" Ethan stood immediately. "This is no time for deliveries." "I know." "Then leave this to the professionals." The young man glanced toward Emma again. "There aren't any professionals here yet." The words hung in the air. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the driver noticed something almost everyone else had missed. Emma's chest wasn't rising normally. Her breathing came in short, strained gasps. Her fingertips had started turning slightly blue. He knelt carefully beside her. Without touching her yet, he observed every detail, the position of her head, the rhythm of her breathing. The color of her lips, her pulse. His expression became serious. "When did she collapse?" A secretary answered quickly. "Maybe 2 minutes ago." "What was she doing?" "She was laughing with her father. Then suddenly she grabbed her throat." The driver looked toward Ethan. "Did she eat anything?" Ethan blinked. "A cookie from the cafe downstairs." The young man's eyes narrowed slightly. "Did she say anything before falling?" Ethan searched his memory. "She said," his voice broke, "she couldn't breathe." Silence spread across the room. The delivery driver took one slow breath. "I think her airway is blocked." Several people stared at him. The executive who had stopped him crossed his arms. "And how exactly would a delivery driver know that?" The young man ignored the question. Instead, he looked directly at Ethan. "Sir, I need your permission." Ethan hesitated. Everything inside him screamed not to trust a stranger, especially not someone he had humiliated that morning. "What are your qualifications?" The young man answered honestly. "I'm not a doctor." Several employees immediately shook their heads. "I knew it. This is ridiculous. We need to wait." But the driver continued speaking. "My parents were paramedics." The room grew quieter. "I spent years learning emergency care from them." His voice remained calm. After they died, I kept studying. He pointed toward Emma. I've practiced airway emergencies hundreds of times using training equipment at the community center. Someone whispered, "You've practiced." He nodded. "The volunteer instructor lets me stay after classes." Another employee looked surprised. "You volunteer there, whenever I'm not working." Ethan looked torn. Every second felt impossible. Trust a stranger or wait for an ambulance. The driver wasn't trying to impress anyone. He wasn't begging. He simply watched Emma. Then he quietly said, "She doesn't have much time." Those words hit Ethan harder than anything else. He looked at his daughter, at her tiny face, at her desperate struggle to breathe. His hands shook. What would you do?" The young man answered immediately. "First, I need everyone to step back." People obeyed without thinking. For the first time, the room became quiet. The driver gently positioned Emma exactly as he had been taught. His movements were careful, respectful, precise. He spoke softly, almost as if trying to comfort her. "It's okay." Nobody knew whether he was speaking to the little girl or to himself. He checked her airway once more. His face suddenly became even more serious. "This is worse than I thought." At that exact moment, the elevator doors opened. Two paramedics rushed out carrying emergency equipment. Relief spread across the room. Finally, professional help had arrived. But as one paramedic reached Emma's side, he looked at the young delivery driver with surprise. For a brief second, they recognized each other. Then the paramedic said something that made every person in the room fall completely silent. "Wait, I know him." He looked directly at Ethan. "If this young man says your daughter is choking." The paramedic took one quick look at Emma, and his expression instantly changed. "Then don't waste another second." The senior paramedic dropped to one knee beside Emma. In one smooth motion, he confirmed exactly what the delivery driver had seen. "Complete airway obstruction," he said firmly. "Good catch." The room fell silent. Every pair of eyes shifted toward the young delivery driver. Only minutes earlier, he had been treated like he didn't belong inside the building. Now the medical team was listening to him. The paramedic looked at him again. "You noticed the blue fingertips before anyone else?" The young man nodded. "And the weak airflow?" The paramedic gave a small smile. "That's exactly what I saw." Without another second of hesitation, the emergency team began working. One medic prepared specialized equipment while another carefully positioned Emma. Her father stood frozen only a few feet away. The most powerful businessman in the city suddenly looked completely helpless. His expensive watch, his tailored suit, his influence, none of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was the little girl lying on the floor. "Emma," Ethan whispered, "please stay with me." The paramedics worked quickly but carefully. Every movement was precise. The office had become so quiet that people could hear the soft beeping from the medical monitor. Then Emma coughed, a weak sound, but it was enough. Everyone held their breath. Another cough followed, then another. A small piece of food was finally cleared from her airway. Suddenly, Emma pulled in a deep breath. Air rushed back into her lungs. The monitor immediately showed improvement. One employee burst into tears. Another quietly covered his face. Relief swept across the room like a wave. The paramedics continued checking her carefully. "She's breathing," one of them announced. "Her oxygen level is climbing." For the first time in several endless minutes, Ethan allowed himself to breathe. His knees nearly gave out. He reached for his daughter's hand. "I'm here, sweetheart." Emma slowly opened her eyes. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Daddy?" Ethan lowered his forehead against her tiny hand. "I've got you." The little girl looked around the room, still confused. Then her eyes landed on the young delivery driver. A faint smile appeared on her face. "You." Everyone looked at her. She lifted one weak finger toward him. "The nice man." The delivery driver smiled gently but stayed where he was. He didn't move closer. He didn't try to become the center of attention. He simply looked relieved that she was safe. The paramedics prepared Emma for transport to the hospital. Although she was now breathing normally, they wanted to make sure there were no complications. As they secured the stretcher, the senior paramedic stood and walked directly toward the delivery driver. He extended his hand. You remembered your training perfectly. The young man shook it politely. I just remembered what my parents taught me. The paramedic studied him for a moment. I've seen hundreds of emergency volunteers, he smiled. You were one of the best. Several employees looked surprised. You know each other, someone asked. The paramedic nodded. He attended nearly every free emergency response workshop we offered. He looked back at the young man, even after working 10-hour delivery shifts. A quiet murmur spread through the office. One employee whispered, he studied all this after work. Another added, I thought he was just a delivery driver. The young man lowered his eyes. I am? The paramedic shook his head. No, you deliver packages, but that's not who you are. Before the conversation could continue, Ethan stepped forward. His face had completely changed. The anger was gone, the pride had disappeared, only gratitude remained. He looked at the young man for several long seconds. Finally, he spoke. I owe you an apology. The delivery driver immediately shook his head. Your daughter is safe. That's enough. Ethan's voice cracked. No. It isn't. I judged you before I knew anything about you. The young man gave a small, understanding smile. It happens. Those simple words hurt Ethan even more. They weren't angry, they weren't bitter, they were honest. How many people had dismissed this young man without ever asking his name? The question lingered in Ethan's mind. Just then, Emma reached out from the stretcher. Daddy, I want him to come. Ethan looked confused. Come where? The hospital. She smiled weakly. I don't want to say thank you later. The room became quiet again. The young delivery driver hesitated. He glanced toward the package he had dropped near the reception desk earlier. His phone vibrated inside his pocket. Another delivery deadline, another customer waiting. Another day's wages he couldn't afford to lose. He looked back at Emma, then at the long list of deliveries still waiting on his scooter outside. For a brief moment, he stood between responsibility and kindness. He had no idea that the choice he made in the next few seconds would uncover a connection between his own past and the Brooks family. A connection hidden for nearly 15 years, one that neither he nor Ethan could have imagined. The young delivery driver looked at the phone in his hand. 3 missed calls from his supervisor. A message flashed across the screen. Final warning. Complete your route or today's pay will be deducted. He quietly slipped the phone back into his pocket. I should finish my deliveries, he said softly. Before he could turn away, Ethan stopped him. Please. It was the first time anyone in the company had ever heard the CEO say that word to an employee, especially to someone he had mocked only hours earlier. My daughter wants you there. The driver hesitated. I can't afford to lose this job. Ethan looked at the delivery company manager who had just arrived after hearing about the emergency. I'll personally cover today's deliveries, Ethan said, and if there's any financial loss, I'll pay for all of it. The manager nodded immediately. No problem, Mr. Brooks. Only then did the young man agree. As the ambulance doors closed, Emma smiled weakly at him through the window. You still don't know my name, she whispered. He smiled back. I'm Daniel. I'm Emma. The ambulance pulled away. An hour later, the doctors confirmed the good news. Emma would make a full recovery. Dangerous blockage had been removed just in time. Had treatment been delayed by only a few more minutes, the outcome could have been very different. Ethan quietly stepped into the hospital hallway where Daniel sat alone with a paper cup of coffee. I've been thinking, Ethan said. You noticed things trained professionals hadn't even seen yet. Daniel shrugged. My parents taught me to stay calm during emergencies. What did they do? They were paramedics. Ethan nodded slowly. I'm sorry for your loss. Daniel smiled faintly. They believed every life deserved the same effort, whether the person was rich or poor. Those words struck Ethan deeply. He remembered the way he had spoken to Daniel that morning, not as a person, but as someone beneath him. For the first time in years, Ethan felt genuinely ashamed. He extended his hand. Daniel, when Emma is discharged, I'd like you to visit us. Daniel looked surprised. I think there are parts of your story, and mine, that we still haven't discovered. 2 days later, Emma returned home smiling, healthy, and full of energy. True to his word, Ethan invited Daniel to their house for dinner. It was the first time Daniel had ever stepped inside a home so grand. Yet what caught his attention wasn't the size of the mansion or the expensive artwork. It was a framed photograph on a bookshelf. Daniel froze. The picture showed two young paramedics standing beside an ambulance. They were his parents. Ethan noticed his expression. "You recognize them?" Daniel slowly nodded. "They're my mother and father." A wave of silence filled the room. Ethan carefully picked up the photograph. 15 years ago, I was involved in a terrible highway accident." His voice became quiet. "I was trapped inside my car. Your parents were the first to reach me." Daniel listened without saying a word. "The doctors later told me that if they had arrived even a few minutes later, I wouldn't have survived." Ethan looked down at the photograph. "I never forgot what they did for me. This picture has stayed with me ever since." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. "They always said kindness comes back when you least expect it." Ethan smiled sadly. "They were right." He reached into a folder resting on the table. "I can't repay your parents." He gently handed the folder to Daniel. "But I'd like to honor them." Inside was a full university scholarship to medical school, along with a position in Brooks Global's Community Health Foundation to support his living expenses while he studied. Daniel stared at the papers, unable to speak. The dream he had quietly protected for years was suddenly within reach. Emma ran over and wrapped her arms around him. "Now you'll become the doctor you always wanted to be." Daniel smiled through his tears. Months later, he walked through the doors of medical school carrying the same worn notebook he had studied from during late nights after work. Its pages were old. Its corners were bent. But now, every note inside carried a new meaning. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness doesn't end with one life saved. It quietly travels from one heart to another, returning years later when hope seems impossible. Because true greatness is never measured by wealth, titles, or power. It is measured by the lives we choose to lift when no one is watching.